Welcome to Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and I serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystem Development. My mama said, many hands make light work. Now, if memory serves correctly, she said it when she wanted me to help her with some chore around the house. While the proverbial wisdom rings true far too often, we imagine that those additional hands could just get in the way of what I want to do, even if the job is more daunting when doing alone. Through the years of working with pastors, and in particular with church planters, I have heard many wonderful plans and strategies for beginning new works. Most of those plans, however, seem to focus on what the planter brings to the table. Sure, they want people. We all know the adage of getting the nickels, noses, and noise going in a new church. That's all necessary. But too often, the entrepreneurial spirit of a planter becomes a myopic visionary when they can't see the need for building a team around him. It's important to hear those voices who have been planters, though without the title, those who have served as part of a team without the office. Well, I'm pleased to have today Joe Brand. Joe is a senior generosity strategist with Generous for the past 16 years. He's a ruling elder in the Metro Atlanta Presbytery, and as a certified fundraising executive, he has served planters and assisting them in raising their initial financial support teams. He worked at MTW for 11 years as a trainer and support raising coach, and has served dozens of PCA churches in generosity development planning. Mark Kaiser is a ruling elder at Jacob's Well Church in Green Bay. He's participated in 4 church plants, with being part of that leadership team on 3 of them. For the last 10 years, he's been the chair of the Wisconsin Presbytery M&A Committee. He is the president, CEO, owner of Linquist Machine Corporation, a custom machine solutions provider. And we have Shauna Freilich. Shauna is a lecturer in the communications department at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Loves sharing the gospel with her students, and she attends All Saints Church in Green Bay with her husband, Elder Ryan, and their 4 teenagers. And again, as always, before we jump in, let me start off by saying this is meant to be a conversation. We invite you to ask questions using the chat box or Q&A feature with Zoom. We are not on Facebook today, but so I want to be able to jump in. Folks, now as we get underway, for each of you, gave you a little brief introduction, but tell me a little bit more about yourself, about the church plants, where, when, with whom, how'd you get involved, all that kind of background. Joe, would you kick us off?
I sure would. Thank you, Chris. So my work with Generous, to properly pronounce our firm's name, has been aimed at helping church planters, the initial church planters in the team, raise the financial support that they need to get started. Sometimes these numbers are relatively small. In the case of a plant in Portland, it was over $1 million. And so they spent, actually it was $5 million over 5 years, Portland being quite expensive. Anyway, all of those were pretty successful by the time we were done.
Good. And as far as your engagement in planting itself, what does that look like?
Well, I'm part of a church plant now,
okay,
which has since particularized, but most of my conversations have been around M&A church planters or MTW missionaries who are raising support.
Yeah. Excellent. Shauna, what's been your experience in the various places with church planting?
Yep. So I met my husband in law school. We graduated from Marquette in Milwaukee, and we were stationed down in San Antonio, Texas, looking for a church. God's providence brought us to Redeemer before it actually planted. So we were at one of their outreach events and met Tom and Tara Gibbs, fell in love with the vision, and just experienced 4 years of gospel transformation and growth. The Lord brought us back to Wisconsin, where we're both from. And from there, we became part of Jacob's Well church plant. Mark Kaiser and my husband were 2 of the launch team elders for that. And recently, over the past 4 or 5 years, have been part of another church plant in the Green Bay area, All Saints, where we currently reside.
So if you've been part of then 3 church plants,
Yes.
correct? Are you a glutton for punishment? Just kind of tell me what's been the excitement? What has been the highlight?
No, that's great. That's a great question. I mean, the honest reality is when we showed up in San Antonio, we were lonely and we didn't know anyone. And to be embraced and loved as newcomers into a new city with just the love of Christ was unbelievable. And so we were newly married. We were the couple that said, hey, we'll show up early. Where do you want us to serve? What do you want us to do? You want me to lead Bible study? You want me to make coffee, bulletins? You got it. I mean, we were that couple. And so that's where we really were engrafted. And I think the joy and the impetus of more plants is seeing people come to faith in Christ who are non-churched. And I came to faith in Christ in law school. And because of my story, walking in darkness for many years and experiencing the love of Christ, to be a part of church plants where seats and pews are not full, but you're inviting the skeptic, you're inviting the person who's wandering or struggling, or maybe the religious person who has been dulled to thinking they know. It's just amazing to be a part of it. So it's a joy.
Okay.
So a part of me hopes this might be the final resting place, and I love our church, All Saints, to be honest.
I doubt it, Shauna. I doubt it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a bad turn of a phrase. We don't want this to be your final resting place.
Yes, I know.
And Mark, your experience.
Yeah. So I have been a part of 4 church plants. The first one was I became a believer in Greensboro, North Carolina when I was very young, 28. And about a year after we had started, became members of that church, they planted a church. And so not knowing any better, I just happened to like the young pastor that was going to start it up. So we went with it. And then we moved to Milwaukee. I was part of a plant on the east side of Milwaukee. And that's where I actually became a ruling elder for the first time. Out of that plant, we planted a church on the west side of Milwaukee. I wasn't there that long because then I got transferred to Green Bay. And there I was planted a 4th church, which was Jacob's Well with Shaunas. So four swings at it. And I will say it's in my life, my faith at times it's stronger and weaker. And the one thing that I have found is when I'm involved in that startup, in that church plant startup, I think I get very uncomfortable. And I think that uncomfortableness really helps me grow in my faith tremendously. So that's been the real benefit. Now, it's not always fun doing it, don't get me wrong, but I certainly see myself grow spiritually when I'm involved in those plants.
Yeah, so there is both an outward opportunity of serving, but an inward opportunity for personal growth, it sounds like. Yeah. So tell us what was your roles initially? Shauna, you mentioned as a young married couple, no kids, like we'll do anything. So what's been the range of your roles in church plants? How has that morphed over the years?
Yeah, no, that's good. So I would say early on, it was just hands on deck. You need help. We were there to help. Tom Gibbs, the planting pastor at Redeemer, he did an outstanding job inviting men and women into training right away, where we had opportunity to delve into the Westminster and Calvin's Institutes and looking at short stories from Flannery O'Connor. I mean, it was just such a rich time. And my husband was asked then to pursue eldership. At that point, I was teaching women's Bible studies, so loved teaching and regularly, would host small groups at the house, outreach events. We had we started our family when we were in San Antonio, so I was a young mom, and we had picnics in the park where we would gather women in the church. At Jacob's Well, when we moved to Green Bay, at this point, I had 4 children, and they were 4 and 5 years. So I was running after kids most of the time, but once again, looking for fellowship outreach events as far as picnics in the park in the summer months, led and taught Bible studies, helped with women's ministry. I did that with Tara Gibbs down in San Antonio, and then Jacob's Well. And then moving on to All Saints, my kids are grown up now, they're teenagers. So in many ways, they have their own world. And so I still teach Bible studies regularly. And then what I would say, I've grown and morphed into, as a lecturer, full-time lecturer at the university, really turning my attention to pursue the gospel with students and hosting monthly events, bonfires at my house, where we open up a parable and we talk about Jesus. And it's pretty impressive to see who God brings. And recently, over the past year, have really felt a call and a move to go to the weak and needy, to see that my poor sister is actually Christ knocking. And so I've gotten involved at Golden House, which is a women's shelter for abuse. And once a week, a group of ladies and I, we go and we serve a meal and we open up the Psalms, and they come and they want to hear about Christ. And they're starting to come to church, which is just exciting. So I guess that terrain just shows, based on stage of life, needs of the church. And so, we're that couple now that at All Saints, at least, when it's our Sunday to serve, all 4 of our kids are serving with us on Sunday. One is doing soundboard, one's doing bulletins, communion setup, and where we're needed, we will go.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Joe or Mark, how has it morphed for you over the years? If you've been in it for so many years, so many plants, it's not the same each time.
So it's been, for me, it's been somewhat consistent. So with the 4 planters that I've worked with, generally they were all, this was their first time being a number one or being the pastor of the church. They had some ministry experience or very little, but some had some not much at all. And so I'm a businessman. And so where the things that I generally focus on is trying to help the team with some of the stuff that I don't think they teach in seminary all that well. So the organizational things, the leadership stuff, issues, developing it, the financial piece of it. So my involvement has been real heavy in those areas, as well as being a resource for the planter, somebody to be able to bounce ideas off of, and console them on the bad days and pump them up on the good days. That's been, I think, has been pretty consistent throughout my many years of doing this.
And for full disclosure, one of those guys you could only put up with for 1 year, until you had to run away from Waukesha and go to Green Bay.
Yeah, that particular guy was a ruling elder with me on the east side of Milwaukee, and he was getting his PhD in theology, and for some reason decided he wanted to plant the church, and so he became the planter. That guy needed the most of my help of all 4 of them by far.
And Mark, is that when you started drinking so heavily?
Yeah. Chris Vogel was that man. So it was great.
Joe, any thoughts for yourself?
I would. My story has changed over the years. Initially, most church planters were only thinking about how can I raise money in the near term, the short term, and how quickly can I do that, because their initial funding was what was going to get them out on the field and give them a platform, a foundation to get started in their ministry. Over time, that's certainly that continues. But what I've tried to help them understand is that raising money is not something to be afraid of. You could reduce it to just 2 words or 3 words: telling and asking. The challenge is for most people, and Mark mentions this, my number 2 son is a teaching elder in Seattle, and we've talked about this stuff. He said, we don't talk about anything in seminary that is remotely related to fundraising. It's, Bible theology, polity, church history, those kinds of things, languages, but it's not about organizational development. It's not about systems. that tend toward the long-term, support and livelihood of the church. So if you get it down to telling and asking, that's something you can, understand in a few bites. But then you have to work on helping people tell and ask in a more winsome, gospel-centered way, so that you don't ever communicate to your givers that you're looking at them as if they're some kind of human ATM machine. And then that gets down to just the long-term generosity development issues that church planters frequently ignore. Once they get their money, it's like, well, I'm good. I don't need to stay in touch with my donors. And I think that's a real weakness. So it's been really rich to see the changes over the years.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing then partly is bringing additional skills to work with the planter, because none of us have a full skill set for everything, and so how to round that out, and a lot of times, especially in our context where our officers are just men, as according to our polity, then how do we as planters reach the other half of the population, and engage in a much more full-orbed way? So all that comes in. Well, good. What have, let's start with the happy news. What have been the highlights for you of being a church plant? Because you're in a church plant, it particularizes and it continues to grow and flourish, and all that's good. But what is it about the plant that has excited you and encouraged you the most through the years?
I went last time. I'm going first this time. I would say it is the spiritual formation that comes out of a church planting experience, both for the new folks that join that plant, but also for the pastor and his family. Getting involved in this, and I tell my clients on the generosity side and the church planting side, you have been called to the most wonderful, hideous job imaginable. You get to watch life change, and baptisms and births and weddings, and even funerals can be moments of great, spiritual formation. I went to one yesterday and I came away inspired. On the other hand, you have to watch marriages fail and families split apart and all kinds of terrible things. You have to do burials, right? So it's very, very challenging, but these are opportunities for your faith to grow. And I want to be there to not just help them with the mechanics of support raising, but also to be a pastor to them.
Yeah, right.
So I mentioned earlier about the uncomfortableness and the growth of the spiritual formation of myself with time. But what I've also experienced is during those planting times, I have seen the most people come to Christ. I have seen the church be so externally focused because it has to be. It doesn't have a choice, right? It doesn't survive if it's not. And so what happens is, as the church grows and it gets more comfortable, well, then the focus starts to creep into that internal mode, right? You've got members that you have to take care of, and your resources get taken up by more internal work rather than the external work. So to me, what's really been eye-opening is, from sharing the gospel and for having people, the people who don't know Christ come to know Christ. I think the church planting is the best way to go. I think it's the most effective way to go. And so that has increased my passion for church planting. And then to take that to become the chair of the M&A committee, which has been one of my most favorite jobs of all time, just to see us multiply in Wisconsin churches on a very continuous basis, and to be a part of those plants and encouraging these planters has just been, it fills my tank. Let's put it that way. It's been an outstanding experience.
Shauna,
That's good.
What have been the highlights?
Yeah, I would say for myself, very similar to Mark, it is seeing empty chairs filled and hearing the stories of people's transformation in Christ. And so in every plant we've been a part of, we've invited friends or neighbors. And when you see Christ and the power of the gospel break through someone's darkness and the freedom they have, it's glorious. And so that probably is creates the biggest joy. With that, I would say too, being able to keep in step with the Spirit, to ask, seek, then to knock, to be very dependent. And so, in church planting, you're more intentional and you're more aware of the lost, and you're aware that there's empty seats that can be filled. And so I think having that mindfulness and seeking the Spirit, and just you invite a lot, and there's a lot of rejection, and in that rejection, my pastor Chad Bodwin at All Saints, he had a fabulous sermon this weekend on rejection, in seeing where our world's at, thinking of how many times you invite and how rejected we can be because of Christ, but then sharing in that suffering, growing closer to the love of the Lord, that occurs. So that then spurs my spirit and need even more.
Oh, great. Well, let's flip it, and Shauna, what's been the hard part, that where you said this may be your last church plant? We'll see what the Lord says.
Yeah.
But so what are the aspects that it's fair to understand this is going to be a bit more difficult than in a particularized organized church?
Yeah, no, it's good. I would say for myself, it can be seasons or months of exhaustion and weariness. That can be very difficult, going through a dry time in the midst of serving and working, doubting at times, God, when I planned this event, this outreach event, with these friends in mind, hoping they would come and they don't. I mean, it's just, that's a loss. That's really hard. That type of, there's a sadness there. And then I would say, probably, another difficulty is, and I'm growing in this, is seeing the spiritual attacks that can come in the midst of space and time, and realizing the enemy wants more than anything to take down a plant. And so that's something I've learned the hard way, and limp now because of some of my struggles I had, at different times. And yet God is so much bigger and greater. And wow, it just shows me in the midst of the loss how much I need to depend upon him.
Good.
Yeah.
I would say some of the harder things were, I on a couple of the plants, I was the treasurer, and there were times where I was wondering how we were going to make payroll next week, right? How is that going to happen? That's not a good feeling. But God always provided. But that was tough. It also could be very physically exhausting, because you have to set everything up. You got to do the service, then you got to take everything down, and you're doing this every week. And so it can get a little bit on the exhausting side, especially as you get a little bit older like me. So those would be a couple examples of some of the stuff that made it the not so good times. I mean,
yeah.
But the good times far outweigh those, believe me.
Yeah. And Chris, I'd add, in concert with what Shaunas said, the Bible describes our sanctification journey at least in three ways: a garden, a race, and a war. And so all of those imply conflict and struggle and hard work. And all of them at least suggest that sometimes you grow weeds instead of wheat. You don't win the race, and you get defeated in battle. And watching church planters experience that has been really difficult. I end up talking to them not about just money, but about their life and family and parenting and all that stuff. And as a certified geezer now, I have a few gray hairs, and I get some credit for being wise. I hope that turns out to actually be true, but just watching them struggle has been hard.
Any thoughts as far as, I know in church planting, especially if the planter is young, his family is usually young. If you are helping out a planter and you've got some years on them and you have kids, you're entering into a plant where they're not going to have some of the things that other churches have for your kids. And that can sometimes be a struggle for launch teams, you know, families at that stage. The planter is there, that's his work, whether, you know, his kids are happy or not, they're going to plow forward. When you're part of a team, sometimes you can say, you know, boy, it'd be so much easier for my kids. Did any of you kind of have to work through that as a family?
My children are all older. Our youngest was the only one that was not a part of our, when I was on staff at Perimeter and an elder there. We actually came to our church plant as a sort of promise to one of the elders at Perimeter that I discipled, who became an elder in our church. And he said, Joe, you should come visit us. And so we did. And we only went to check the box. But our youngest on the way home said that's the first sermon she'd understood in 2 years. And so we switched after 25 years at Perimeter to our church plant because it was so important for her spiritual formation.
Okay, so it was a plus. That's great.
It was a plus for us.
Yeah.
But again, she was a late high schooler at that point.
Yeah. No, that's good.
I would say for us, we've just always had our kids involved. And so, yeah, we haven't had the youth group experience, the normal youth group experience, or the prototypical, younger elementary year experience. But what we find is for our kids to feel a sense of family, like this is, you're part of the body of Christ, really engrafts them in a remarkable way. And so, they get to serve and we get to serve together. Yeah. And there's joy in that, and there's teasing and fighting in that, but that's life. So we bring our family life into the walls of the church. And so, yes, on one hand, it's a very unusual, right, existence. But on the other hand, maybe the consumer large church culture that we've seen and modeled, maybe that's not all that our kids need. I know that's not what I need. And so maybe it's reframing and seeing that a church plant is an opportunity to engage your children at whatever age, whether it's at a park, in a nursery, helping set up, to engage culture differently and to actually put themselves aside to serve others. Yeah. That's invaluable. And in young plants, people get to know each other really well. And there's a tight-knit community early on. And that's, I don't know, invaluable to me for my kids to see older men and women as spiritual moms and dads, to hear other people's voices and to really get a view of the heart of others. Yeah. So some of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, excellent. Yeah, we have a couple questions coming up here, and want to get to those. Anthony, who's in Japan, I see, Joe, you responded to it, but we'll want to follow up a bit more with it. Yeah. Anthony asked, does it make a difference to have a seminary degree for a non-pastor in church planning involvement? I'm thinking about what it means to serve as a church planning assistant here in Japan. Currently a deacon at a Presbyterian church in Japan church, but I raise support under MTW, the national partner category. Well, I think, let me just help rephrase that question. What is it like? You're entering into this team partnership in which certainly the planter has training in a specific area, and an important area, and a vital area. Is coming in, how can I say this? Have you felt you're coming in as an equal on a team, as a servant to do the bidding of the planter? What does that relationship look like?
So I'll try to tackle that first.
Yeah.
My experience has been, and again, I tend to put things in a business vernacular and business examples, but I think it's very similar to what happens in a business. You have a president, you have somebody who runs manufacturing, you have somebody who runs sales. These are all men that have different experiences, they have different training, and in many cases, much different educations. But yet, the challenge is for all of them to meld that together so that they're all working in the same direction. I think the same thing applies in a church organization as well. So that's how I've approached it.
Yeah.
And I think it can be very effective. It can work really well.
Have you found church planters in general, because you've had experience as part of a team, but also working with them in another capacity? Do you sense a respect that's appropriate there, that can go both ways?
Yes. So my experience all 4 times has been with men who have had really good respect for the skills that I brought, and I haven't had any issues there at all.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
I didn't think I gave you a hard time. Here's a question. When lead pastor, church planter, what responsibilities or pressures of church planting did you see your pastor struggle with that the rest of the church could have freed him from if invited? What are the most life-giving ways your pastor has been invited to help bear that load?
I saw my church planters struggle with health issues that could have been ameliorated if members of the planting team or the core group had stepped in, or if they had been allowed to know about it. But also just practical logistical things like putting up chairs. It always flabbergasted me that what we asked pastors to do is essentially to be omnicompetent. And it's, as you said earlier, Chris, none of us are skilled in every way. So admitting that you can't do this and getting people to help you is a skill. But sometimes, since you're the professional Christian on site, bro, we expect you to have all the answers and to do everything. And that's unreasonable. And that's a recipe for burning out a church planter or any pastor.
Yeah.
Chris, I've also seen the planters become discouraged when they're watching the numbers and they see big swings from Sunday to Sunday. The Sundays, attendance might be down significantly for a plant, and I see them lose confidence and get concerned and get anxious about that. I would try to encourage them. Look, this isn't about the numbers. Yeah, the numbers are important, but this isn't about the numbers. It's about being faithful, right? That's what we have to do. Is we got to be faithful, and we're going to trust that God's going to take care of the numbers. But you see that, and even I know these men know this in their hearts, and they've been told it. But you know what? They're still living this church plant thing, and when those numbers start to drop a little bit, it really does affect them emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for myself, I would say 2 things. One is probably praying for the pastor, praying for his family, being a friend. I mean, inviting him over for a meal, being willing to talk and listen to them and engage them, so that there's a sense of partnership and faithfulness, so that they feel strengthened themselves.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. With that, touching back on Anthony, he wanted to get us kind of clarify. He said, does it make a difference for him as a non-pastor to be equipped with a seminary degree to serve in an assistant-like capacity in a church plant? Becoming a ruling outer is on my mind as well. So again, so what would you say to those that are interested in order to serve in a capacity of really being that support, whether as part of a team? Is the seminary degree critical, and must one then become an officer in the church? I'll throw that to you, Shauna, to start with.
Hey, I know, right? Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Okay.
Good. I'm glad. Because
I
I still
know.
don't get it, but that's all right.
Yeah, no, I think for myself, what I would say is, I mean, what God's call for you in serving is unique than, than maybe myself. But can I serve and use my gifts? And so, you know, for myself as a female, I still struggle with the unresolvable tension of gender roles and marginalization of women, because that occurs in our denomination. But if I can use my gifts of teaching, of serving, of encouraging, of leading, then and I can answer to the Lord on that, and see myself as a ministry partner, then, seminary, well, I don't know. I mean, that's a big ask, right? At one point I was asked, if I wanted to pursue that, and I already have a JD, I'm good where I'm at right now. And, as far as being a ruling elder, maybe I'll kick that to Mark Kaiser to answer.
Yeah, don't make me put you on that spot in that sense, but I guess to me, part of it comes down to there are a variety of great callings to be part of a church plant team. And if the degree is accessible, hey, as a pastor or church planner, it'd be great to have someone else that understands some of that nuance. As an officer, that's an important aspect too. But I would say I would not want a team that looks more and more like me. We're all seminary trained, we're all officers and therefore all men. The team's got to be bigger than that, because the world we're reaching is far bigger than that, in that same sense. Some of the other questions that came up, Bob asked here, in a church plant situation, what activities were planned for children in the community, as well as children of the parents attending the church plant? This is, again, how does this fit into when, in a church plant? Sean, you answered a little bit of what that means, but
I mean, that's more of a tactical question. And I would say, it's Easter, so let's have an Easter egg hunt, and invite people in the community and get children involved. Same thing, Halloween, a trunk or treat activity. Early on in a church plant, many will not have the numbers and the adult bandwidth to have a full-on youth group or Awana, like a young children's situation. So, we've been in situations where it's once a month, let's invite kids to come bowling. And so it's more fellowship, socially engaged, but then great opportunity to invite friends and share about the plant. And so those are probably the largest ideas, or experiences I've had.
Thoughts there? Beth asked the question. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I'm going to go off topic here real quick.
Great.
It keep popped into my head, and I'm getting too old. I'll forget if I don't say it. So one thing that is also critical here is the pastor's wife and how that looks with this plant. And we can't, I can't stress this enough. In a plant, a lot falls on the wife, right or wrong, it does. And so it's really important to be watching that dynamic and making sure that the right support structure is around her. And I've seen it done really well, but I've also seen it done where the pastor's wife just gets burnout and is in a bad spot. And so I think that's really critical to have that at the forefront as your particular leadership group, as they're planting the church, to make sure they have their eye on that one, because that can easily go in the wrong direction very fast.
Yeah.
So just sorry for digressing there for a minute.
No, I and that is, one friend, church planter, said his first ruling elder was his wife. I mean, she heard it, she bore it. She did an awful lot and kept him, between the white lines in a lot of ways, and that is very true. And that takes a toll, because they don't, our wives don't really necessarily ask for that.
Yeah.
That that role and they're willing to take it. But then as part of a team, how does the team come around? And that's what you bring up, Mark's a great point. How does the team come around, not just for the planter, but for the planter's wife, the planter's family, in a way that is nurturing?
Yeah, Chris,
Yeah.
somebody in the chat just mentioned parakaleo,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
those that is a key resource for our church plant, and also for lots of the church planters that I've talked to over the years, is to connect them with parakaleo, connect the wives with parakaleo.
Yeah, and I would have been sorely disappointed, knowing that Deneen was online here and didn't bring that back up. Thanks, Deneen, who runs parakaleo. That is one of those aspects in which it is that extremely helpful external resource that's vitally necessary. And it'd be interesting to talk what's the nexus of parakaleo to the planter's wife and to the team as well. So that would be an interesting conversation too. Well, great. Carrie had mentioned, she said, I perked up my ears at Shauna's mention of good lay training that she received in San Antonio, as I have found that to be severely lacking in most or all of the churches that we have been a part of over the years, both plants and established churches. Any resources for lay training that's available to other churches and plants to access or use? What have you found helpful for you in that context? And any of you, but
Yeah.
Shauna.
Well, I mean, I'll just start that once again. I'm so grateful that Tom Gibbs invited men and women. That is really pressing against some of the extra biblical restrictions that are out there in our culture. Particularly with women, and the other plans that I've been a part of, men and women have been invited to spaces as well, which I think is really good. But I also will say, I think there's more to do. There's a lot more to do in engaging women and inviting them into spaces of learning and education. So for myself today, I love two things. I love to read, and I read many different biographies of the saints, many different writings, and I find that to be incredibly rich. They don't have to come out of our specific tradition. There are many men and women who love Jesus, and it's like this treasure trove. And the other piece I would say, which isn't a normal school, okay, of thought, but rising early and spending time in deep transformative prayer with the Lord. That is the best school to grow close to Jesus. And, contemplative prayer paths, scripture meditation, it opens a realm of entering God's presence and growing in the gospel in a way that is beyond the book. And so I would encourage you possibly to pursue scripture meditation and deep transformative prayer.
If we're talking about equipping elders and deacons to do the work of ministry, I would recommend two resources. Really, one is derivative of the other. Perimeter has a curriculum called TLC, TFL, Theological Foundations for Leaders. And leaders of every type and stripe have to go through this course and pass it. I taught the course several times there. And then when we came over to New City, I helped teach part of our sections there at New City. It is a very wide, talk about widely reading, like Sean is saying, you read a whole bunch of books. And I didn't come from a Reformed background early in my Christian life, but this stuff really gave me a foundation for understanding what we believe, why we believe it, and where the scriptures speak clearly about these things. Super helpful. All those materials are available for free. Bob Cargo, the church planning director at Perimeter, or you could reach out to me and I can get you connections to that. I bet M&A has resources for this kind of stuff too.
I know what, as a church planter, you're feeling under the pressure to become particularized. So there's a financial component. There's really, I'd say, many ways just as important is the leadership component. So, we had a leadership, what I call leadership deployment kind of things for all the men in the church, and I kind of quickly stopped and go, that really should be for a whole church. And so I ended up always having and I found it helpful having a leadership deployment for women separately, because some of the women would shy away from engaging and talking if men were in the room, and some of the men would shy. I mean, it's just a cultural construct. But one of some of the more fruitful things I saw happen was going through that same officer development program that I did for those who were seeking office, doing it for women as well. They were not going to be holding office, they were holding important roles, and that training was absolutely vital and created a lot of fruitfulness in that same context. So that was helpful. A seminary student asks here, what are some of the ways that so this is somebody who's entering into it, we can grow in organizing, budgeting, and other weak points that you have noticed. What are the tools, curriculum, opportunities to seek out? So, you've all met the young pastor just starting out, and you can see his weaknesses. Mark is smiling already, thinking of many of them. What would you say if you could just take some time, kid, and focus on this? What would it be?
Okay, so can I mention Next Gen, or is that a conflict of interest?
I don't know why
Chris?
that'd be a conflict of interest. I think Next Gen Pastor, ngpastors.com would be a good thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark. Go right ahead.
Would be it. So Chris and I have been having that discussion for decades. Would you say decades, Chris?
Almost 40 years now, Mark. So
yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so, and I do feel very strongly that I don't think our seminaries are giving enough teaching here, and I understand that maybe they can't because of what they do have to get done, especially from a theological standpoint, from a training standpoint. But what's been encouraging to me is, and I've been involved with this, is what Chris has been doing with his Next Gen program. It addresses all those skill sets that I don't think planters get in seminary, and he's put together a terrific curriculum, and I've actually been a part of some of the teaching myself with some of the cohorts, and I've just been I've been really impressed with it. So that's what I would encourage the young pastors that are coming out of seminary and looking for some of that training. I would encourage them to look at Next Gen.
I threw the link up there for the website, but yeah, in that it is looking at what we call the soft skills, the spiritual formation, self-care, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, the leadership skills. We probably have the most modules on that, and then marriage and family. So there's about 30 different modules, one-day events that it does what seminaries, in a sense, really shouldn't be doing. We say, oh, if only they could, but it's great to have both these working together in a relationship. Other thoughts?
It's down to the grassroots level. So, like, one of my favorites is the module on how to run a meeting. That's really critical. I mean, it's important to know how to run a good and effective meeting, right? And it's not something that just happens on its own. So it's just that bare bones, basic stuff that I think really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, good. Any other thoughts, Joe or Shauna, on that? Of what would you tell, if maybe I would ask it a different way. You're going to design similar to what we're doing here, but you're designing a seminar to teach a church planter what he doesn't know and really should know about church planting. What would your topic be?
No, well, I'd have to talk about the financial side.
Mm-hmm.
It is just a kind of blindness to say that I'm not a fundraiser as a pastor.
Yeah.
And in fact, what most churches underestimate is that they have an advantage over every other nonprofit. uh, every other Christian nonprofit, because they can talk about their vision and mission 52 or more times a year. What happens though, Chris, is that the conversation around generosity gets reduced to what my experience growing up was either 5 words or 9 words. The 9 words were these: now it's time for God's tithes and our offerings. And then they'd sit down. And the 5 words were even less. The guy would hold the platform and go, if the ushers will come, and then he'd sit down. And so there was no instruction or teaching around why I was doing what I was about to, why I was going to do what I was about to do. And you didn't help me understand how a young guy is supposed to manage his resources as a Christian. And so some kind of instruction beyond that is important, but also not just asking for money, but connecting my giving, my interest in giving, to the mission and outreach of our congregation is so important. If you want to help people learn to give, help them understand why they need to give more than how much you need from them or what they're giving to. Help them to understand that we're talking about life change. We're not talking about raising dollars per se. It's what the dollars will do.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Another question came up. How did belong to a church plant challenge you to think differently about what the Christian life in the church's mission is all about? So what specifically in the plant helped reshape you as a Christian that may or may not have, but let's just say may not have happened in a particularized church?
Well, I'll start. 2 things for myself. When we became part of Redeemer in San Antonio, that was the first time we heard the importance of the gospel being for us every day, not just for salvation, but for sanctification. And so, wow, I mean, you take that teaching and then you apply it to living your life. And it's not about performance. It's not about earning God's favor, but it's about loving the one who loved me first and seeing that extension. And so with that, I would say early on, I just thought, in many ways it was like, this is great. Everything's going wonderful. And as time went on, you realize, oh, I'm tired, and there's exhaustion and there's struggle. And so church planting has moved me to a deeper dependence on the Lord. And with that, just growing and understanding my need for Christ every day. I saw a question that came up from another member on just the enemy attacks and what do you do in prayer. And, for our current church, we have a weekly Zoom prayer meeting in the morning, early morning, and men and women come together and pray for our community in our church. And I think just being aware of the battle that we're in, the spiritual battle that we're in, standing firm and standing not just firm, but also humbly, and being willing to repent and collapse at the cross and seeking grace daily. I would say those are probably some of my wandering thoughts.
Good. Yeah.
So I'd say two things, and I think I mentioned both of these before, was learning how to live my life and my faith in uncomfortableness, and accepting that that's good for me, right? And it's good for me to be uncomfortable. I think I certainly know I like being comfortable. I like having things be predictable, and church planting has taught me to live a life that is not comfortable, and accept that as a good thing, and allows me to become more dependent on God. And then part of that uncomfortableness is this, that you have to be so extremely outward focused, and you have to be inviting people, you have to be sharing the gospel, because there's no other choice but to do that. And that drives some of that uncomfortableness. So you struggle with those things when you're planting a church, but you struggle in a positive way, not in a negative way. So those would be the two things that I would say, or I would walk away with.
Yeah, boy, it's just so encouraging to hear this stuff. It makes me remember I'm not alone. Being in a part of a church plant means you're on mission. And being on mission is kind of like being on duty 24 hours a day. And so there have been a number of inflection points for me personally over the last 8 years where I just wanted to give up. I didn't want to be a ruling elder. I didn't want to be an elder in the church plant. I didn't want to coach church planters. And it was my pastor in my church community, but largely my pastor's character. And his is a beautiful human being. Just his encouragement and support and telling me that, no, I need your voice in our midst, and don't stop. Those were really important. So what the church planter can say to his leaders, his developing leaders, is really, really important.
That's great. Well, and just got a couple minutes of just one last question then. It's actually a question that church planter Ben asked. He said, how can a pastor support elders, deacons, leadership team planting the church with them? So put it this way, what are two things you would say if the church planter should not neglect this to encourage his team? What would those things, what would that be?
So say that again, Chris. Two things that the church planter should do to encourage his team.
Yeah. So you're on his team. What have planters done? What do you wish they would have done to encourage you in the work you're doing as part of this church plant?
Okay. So one thing would, because the planters that I have worked with have done this. One thing is to continually and consistently encourage me to be back in the Word. All right. And because they're in the Word a lot, right? They're preparing sermons every week. They're putting a lot of time and effort into that. Those ruling elders, not so much. And so that has always been really helpful for me, is when we start a meeting, we're in the Word, right? I'm encouraged. Hey, Mark, what are you doing for your quiet time? What does it look like? How's it going? Or suggesting what I could be doing for a quiet time. That has been really encouraging for me and helpful too. Yeah. So I'll start with that.
Yeah, let's just do one. We've got 3 minutes left. What, Shauna, Joe?
Yeah, so I think for myself, I'll talk about my current pastor. He is such a good shepherd, and sees me and has compassion, and doesn't see me as just a ministry partner, but sees me as someone who needs a shepherd. So I am incredibly broken and beautiful. And to be known and seen that way and cared for that way, oh my, I mean, that's what I need. That's what my family needs, to be known.
Great.
I would add only this. I want my pastor to listen to me, because I have life experiences and skill sets that he doesn't have, and several times his age. But also I want him to differ with me and disagree with me, but to do so with grace and to respect my dignity. And so when that has happened, I'm just all the more engaged.
Oh, that's great. Oh, great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and thoughtfulness through this. It is indeed, I think, an important conversation. As it's true in all of our professions, we end up talking to those who are on the same context that we are, but hearing other voices, I think, really helps balance us out. Our next webinar is going to be May 18th. We'll be talking with RBI and pastoral well-being, and the work John Metlock and Donald Guthrie have been doing there, and some of what we mentioned already with those soft skills that Next Gen focuses on will no doubt be part of that conversation. So please, you'll get the registration. You'll get a link for this YouTube for this conversation, and then links to be able to register for other webinars. And so again, we thank you. Lord bless and take care. Bye.